Let's talk about active recovery. I really like recovery as a facet of focus in training because it's something that we can do well no matter what our experience is, what our age is, or what our ability is in climbing. When I look at the spectrum of athletes, one of the things that we see is like, yes, a young athlete that can train day after day after day has a greater potential for developing strength and power and endurance and all of these things. But as we age up, we can start to manipulate other parts of our physiology, other parts of our discipline, and those things are things that we can use to help level the playing field and stay in the sport longer and do it with fewer injuries. We train, push ourselves into this hole, and then we recover and push ourselves back out of that hole. And we all participate in recovery, and whether we're actually doing it well or not is a really big question in how well we're going to perform. The two main facets of recovery are nutrition and sleep. If we can cover the bases of good nutrition and getting plenty of rest at night, we're covering most of what recovery is. And you can throw a lot of numbers around, but let's say that's 80% of your recovery. Well, there's another big chunk of that, and this is the recovery that we get between bouts of exercise. And what science is starting to show us is that actively engaging with recovery is better than just sitting around in between bouts of training. Active recovery can take place on 3 time scales. We can look at recovering actively between exercises or between reps of exercises even. We can look at active recovery between training sessions, or we can look at active recovery on a monthly or 6-8 week scale. Let's look at active recovery in terms of between bouts of exercise first. What sports science is starting to show us is that actively moving between difficult exercises helps us replenish the fuel that we need for subsequent exercises. The more intensive the exercise is, the more pumping, the more tiring it is, the more endurance oriented it is, the more people seem to benefit from having an active recovery mode. There's some really interesting research that includes actual research on rock climbers, which is exciting, that shows that active recovery modes between hard bouts of route climbing enhances your ability to recover. In one particular study, they had some climbers climb until failure, until they just pumped off of a wall. Then they rested for like 20 minutes, and then they did it again. And the athletes that did some active recovery, in this case it was stationary cycling, were actually able to perform better on their second bout of climbing. Any of you that are familiar with going out to the crag and climbing until you're absolutely fatigued and falling off, anything that makes you feel better the next go is going to be really amazing. What those scientists also saw was that just sitting around passively between climbs actually saw the athletes have a second bout of climbing that was a little worse than the first one. So any kind of active recovery in between is probably a good way to go. There's another study that they did where climbers compared doing walking on a treadmill as a recovery mode to doing light climbing as a recovery mode. And the light climbing showed up as a better recovery mode between hard bouts of climbing. Now, in practical terms, that probably doesn't help us very much, because the last thing I want to do after I pump off of a really hard route is to walk over to an easier route and continue to climb. Physiologically, muscularly, that might be okay, but my shoes are going to really hurt, my skin is going to hurt, and my climbing partner is going to be pissed. And so I want to be really careful about how I try to apply these principles to my actual climbing days. And so probably the best thing we can do is to find a way to get a little bit of active movement after a really exhausting set of climbing. When it comes to bouldering, when it comes to shorter, more intense sets, it seems like the value of active recovery is a little bit less. It's probably not a bad idea to do a few hard boulder problems, then take off your shoes, move around the gym a little bit, maybe do some stretching. But doing something that's really super highly intense or requires a lot of time is probably not a positive for you when it comes to resting between bouldering sets, where probably passive recovery is still the best recommendation. The next level at which we want to look at active recovery is between training sessions. One of the main problems that we see with the climber mentality is that every single training session that we do needs to be the hardest thing we've ever done. Every time I go to the gym, I go to the death. Every time I finish a workout, I go until I can't move anymore. That deep dedication to feeling fatigued can be positive mentally, but it's probably not the best for you physiologically. And actually putting into your training program some maintenance level sessions that aren't quite so hard and some actual recovery sessions is going to be really helpful. If you can do a really hard session, say on a Tuesday night, and follow it up on Wednesday with some very light foam rolling, stretching, cardiovascular activity that is at a very low intensity, the studies show that you can actually enhance your recovery before that next session. So instead of finishing that hard session, going out, having a beer and a piece of pizza, and then just lounging on the couch the next day, we can eat well, sleep well, do active recovery, and then get back in the gym and train hard again. Over the long period, we're going to be able to compress the number of great sessions that we have if we can recover really well in between. So the active recovery parameters in that regard are to recover at a brisk pace, but usually less than about an hour of activity. We don't want to be going hard enough that we're gasping for air or that we can't hold a conversation, but we do want to get out there and actually move rather than like strolling through the garden. The other thing we can do with this is do some full body stuff, as we saw in that climbing research study, where maybe we do a light calisthenic circuit, very light weight circuit, but keep the duration short, keep the intensity very low, and feel like at the end of that recovery workout, we feel better than when we went into it. 2 or 3 days of light cardio training is actually probably really helpful for our recovery between intensive sessions. The third facet of active recovery is to actually have deload weeks within a monthly cycle. In our Climb Strong coaching programs, most of our athletes are on a 3-week build with a 1-week deload, and the coaches will program slightly progressive training for 3 weeks and then a full deload on that 4th week. That 4th week features more low intensity, easy activity that's got the idea of taking this big, long, deep breath of sorts between hard bouts of training. If we don't put those rest weeks in, those rest weeks will come get us. And what I mean by that is if you continue to push harder week after week after week, one of 3 things is going to happen. You're going to overtrain, you're going to get sick, or you're going to get injured. And that happens to everybody across the board. If you get to a point that you're training at the same intensity every single week and everything's going great, you're probably not pushing yourself very hard. And if you push yourself harder and harder and harder each week without actually planning that deload, you're going to get bit. And so once every 4 weeks, for some athletes, it's once every 5 weeks. We want to back off, take a big active recovery time. You can still go out and climb. You can go and climb hard, but you want to back off on your total volume and you want to back off on the intensity of most of the stuff you're doing. When we look at the value of active recovery, we have a higher ability to do intensive sessions, we have a lower incidence of injury, and we have higher compliance with training. What that means is you can stay psyched longer. And so if you can force yourself to step back and take some rests, you're going to have better training results in the long run.